talk about rubrics. Um, as a general recommendation, whenever you're working on something and you're looking for some extra support or some extra resources, we recommend making sure to stay plugged into the NTN Help Center. This is where we're keeping kind of all of our best information, resources, and so on. And so in this case, if we were working on rubrics, we could go ahead and type rubric into the search box, and immediately all kinds of useful things come up. Two that I would point out in particular, one would be a link to all of the New Tech Learning Outcome rubrics and templates, so all of the resources we've put together to help with some language and building out rubrics. And then there's even a link here for a little overview about how to build a rubric for your project. And this overview has a great little introduction to some of our language and terminologies, including a little visual. There's a link to a very useful document that lays out some very specific assumptions that we make around rubric use, and we'll actually illustrate some of those assumptions in the video that we're doing right now. And then there's even a little step-by-step guide to going ahead and building a rubric. But that's not what we're interested in right now. We want to just see, what does one look like? So as an example, I'm going to show you a rubric from our Sanctuary Cities project, which is a project that we often use in simulation because it can apply to so many different places in our country. A few things that I would note about this, just kind of from the beginning, is in this project we began by identifying a power standard and a really key concept. And in this case, the big power standard key concept is around the sharing of powers between the state and national and local governments under federalism, and really the way that so many controversies in our current government and current world involve kind of the tension between federal and local kind of control over those issues. Sanctuary Cities happens to be a very recent and engaging way for us to explore that tension. So in the beginning, we already knew this project is really about helping kids grapple and think about that idea. For this particular project scenario, their main project product is to take on the role of political advisors. And in their group, they're going to provide a policy briefing presentation as well as some additional resources for a relevant local government body. And it could be the city council, it could be the mayor, it could be kind of whomever. And the policy briefing is not about them saying, yes, our city should be a sanctuary city, or no, our city shouldn't. It's about laying out the most important details of the debate and making officials aware of the implications about various decisions. So if a city decided to, there are implications. If the city decided not to be a sanctuary city, there are other implications so that they can make an informed decision. This presentation is the rubric that we're going to look at in this video. I will note that there's also, like many of our strong projects, there's an individual product that is also a performance assessment, and it measures kids' individual understanding of kind of key project ideas. In this case, the individual assessment or the written performance task kind of comes as a twist. So midway through, the mayor is so impressed, or the city council is so impressed by the quality of the early research they're seeing, that they just want to know students' individual opinions. And so students' individual assessment is to write an op-ed piece for the paper laying out why a city should or why they shouldn't. But in this case, we're just going to look at the rubric that we would use to assess the final product. On our way to that rubric, I would note that as we look at the rubric, you may note that agency and collaboration don't show up in the final product rubric. And the rationale for that is we are assessing agency and we are assessing collaboration in the project, and we've done what we ought to do, which is to not try to assess all of agency or try to assess all of collaboration, but we've picked one or two indicators that we think really fit well into the project, and we've lifted those out, and we've noted that we're going to assess these throughout the project through scaffolding activities, maybe through a peer or self-assessment, in all kinds of different little ways. So even though it's not being assessed through the final product, it's being assessed through the project, and we've done some similar prioritization to make all that happen. So here is, and there'll be a link to this resource in the document that you looked at, but here is our rubric for the final product. And I would note we did our best to try to keep it to one page and kind of simplify it down as much as we could to key in on what mattered the most. A few key design decisions that you will see in the rubric is one, you'll note that there are 4 score levels here. There's emerging, developing, proficient, and advanced. That language comes straight from the NTN rubrics. And one thing, we've definitely made a push towards a 4-column rubric as opposed to a 3-column rubric because it's very easy in a 3-column rubric for everything to kind of get sloughed into the middle, and we lose some of the useful distinctions of quality for that. The other thing that I would note is because this rubric is being used to grade students, most of us live in worlds where giving a numerical grade is a key expectation. We actually took out the little in-between score levels because in adding the points scale across the bottom, they were really unnecessary. So it simplified the rubric. We didn't need to talk about a distinction about it being emerging, developing, or developing proficient for the purposes of this. So we just took those out. Other things that you will see in the rubric, one, you will note this, this gray box here where we've got like content is detailed and accurate. It's worth noting that one of our assumptions is that some of your indicators in your rubrics would just come straight from the NTN Knowledge and Thinking rubrics because it matches what you're doing in the project. So it comes straight from that rubric, and we took the liberty of simplifying the language just slightly, which is totally your prerogative. But though that language does show up there, and the value of that is, one, writing rubric language is really hard. So anytime you have language that's been vetted by kind of outside assessment specialists, which these rubrics were for us, it's handy to just pick up and use that language. The other thing that makes the language in the NTN rubrics potentially useful for students and for schools is it's intended to be kind of general disciplinary thinking language, meaning you could talk about content being detailed and accurate over and over and over again in project after project after project, and students get multiple reps with that. So even when the language is a little bit intense, students can really grow to understand what that language means and what it looks like because they can see it in several different projects. Now, that said, not all of the language in the rubric is going to just be cut and pasted from the NTN rubrics. Some of it might come with some modifications. So this piece here in the line around drawing conclusions, this is similar language from the social studies knowledge and thinking rubric, but we shifted it a little bit to the right because we felt like we wanted to, that the proficient score level or the proficient descriptor was really pretty advanced for where our students were at this point in the year. So we took the proficient column, made it advanced, we shifted everything over, and then we just wrote a new emerging indicator based on what we expected a student's kind of progression would look like in our class. So this indicator was straight from the rubric. Here is language from the rubric but modified, and it's shifted over score level wise to be more in line with where our students are at this point in the year. Again, all very valid decisions for us to make as designers. You'll also note that this first indicator around introducing the issue of immigration and the current debate, this doesn't come from the NTN rubrics at all. This is a new indicator, and it's written very specifically for the project. Again, we just want to illustrate that part of what we would expect you to do is use some of our indicators and some of your indicators. In fact, this whole key considerations row in the rubric is still knowledge and thinking, but everything in this domain comes from is written specifically for the project. So we have a mix of general knowledge and thinking indicators and project-specific indicators. It's also worth noting that here we have a set of indicators from our written communication rubric. So we have knowledge and thinking. We also lifted not all of, but some of the indicators from the written communication rubric, and we've put those there. A few other things that we would note around the design of this rubric is, one, you'll note that we've gone ahead and added a point scale to the bottom. Again, our assumption is you'll need to do some grading, and that one of the easiest ways to do that is take the rubric, which describes the work holistically, and establish some points for that. A few things around the design here is we decided that each of these domains was going to be worth 20 points. So this particular domain, as I go here and gather evidence, there's 20 points worth of knowledge and thinking points in this row. There's another 20 points of knowledge and thinking points in this second row. So as I went along and I was grading students on their overview of the issue, they could earn up to 20 points for that part. When I was grading their key considerations, again, there would be another 20 points, and those would total up to being 40 points in the gradebook for knowledge and thinking. The other, as opposed to those are knowledge and thinking points, you'll note that we also are going to be grading students on written communication. In this case, there's going to be 10 points of written communication on this because we decided it was in terms of its, it was a less weighty assessment of students' written communication. It's worth keeping in mind that the points, written communication points relative to the knowledge and thinking points, doesn't make any difference. The Echo gradebook takes care of all that, so we don't even have to worry about that. So these are each worth 20. This one is worth 10. One additional element as we think about the grading piece you will note is we actually, even though this element is worth 20 points, the lowest level, the lowest score band is from 10 to 13 points. The idea here is that we all know that zeros in the gradebook are very punitive when it comes to students' grades and students' learning. And so in an attempt to avoid a zero disproportionately penalizing a student, so in other words, in a 100-point scale, if an F is everywhere from 0 to 60, and then a D is from 60 to 70 points, we actually have, it's a much larger step, and it's much harder for a student to recover from a zero as it would be to just recover from a normal F. So all we're doing here is making the gap between a D to an F the same as the gap between a D to a C, the same as a C to a B. This is one of our, this I think has a lot to do with kind of equity and making sure that students are not disproportionately penalized through their grading. And there's tons of great writing that has been done on that, and that's how we make it show up in the gradebook. The only other thing that I would note, because it's often the question that comes up around indicators like this, is you'll notice that most of the indicators in the rubric are descriptors of quality. So we're talking about how the work grows in quality as you go from the left to the right. We do have one here where we put in a numerical one. So there's a minimum number of resources, and then so we talk about that developing meets the minimum, proficient exceeds the minimum, and also advanced exceeds the minimum. We want to note that we feel like you need to be careful with making everything like I'm just strictly quantified, like you need 6 of these, 3 of these, but it's okay to include that from time to time when it's the most expedient way to demonstrate student proficiency. So in a nutshell, that is kind of the basic design of the product rubric that we would use for the Sanctuary Cities